Hey, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Build an Iconic Life. I'm here with Dr. Harry Karydes out of Chicago. And we've been talking in the back studio a little bit, just getting to know each other better. This is going to be an amazing episode, so stay tuned.
I came from the mud. There's dirt on my hands.
Welcome to Build an Iconic Life podcast. I'm your host, Chris Whitehead. And this podcast is dedicated to help you build a life with zero regrets by focusing on how you have everything you need to stand up, stand out, and live life on your terms. Let's dive right in. Hey, Harry, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Chris. I appreciate it.
I really enjoyed the last 15 minutes of you and I just talking, and I really want to share with people your mission. And I think it's amazing, everybody. We're just going to go 20, 30 minutes here. But I think it's amazing that you took all of this time to, number one, become a physician. And then number two, find that there was something missing.
Mm-hmm.
And you chose, you're still an active physician, correct?
That's correct.
So you're a busy boy. But on top of it, you've decided to take an entrepreneurial bent. Yep. So now you have two jobs.
At least.
Would you mind telling the audience how you came to do what you're doing now? And please walk us through the physician part too.
Sure. Yeah, I'm happy to do it. Thanks for the opportunity. So yeah, as you had mentioned, Chris, I'm an emergency physician, and I've been doing this for 15 years or so as an emergency physician, a paramedic before I went to medical school. And it's something I've always loved. I've always loved the math and the sciences. It came pretty straightforward to me, and I just loved it. But really, in response to your question, how I came about to doing what I do now on the entrepreneurial aspect of it is I have an online platform for physicians and nurses and firefighters, which we'll talk about in just a moment. Because really what happened is I've been doing this on the entrepreneurial aspect of it for about 4, if not going on to 5 years now. And as I think many of your listeners, Chris, have been reading the news that, physicians and especially our nurses have really had a rough go in regards to their mental health or emotional health over the past several years. And I would say I would be part of that camp as well. For me, it's really started in about 2018, where I was working as an emergency physician in my emergency department, in a community emergency department, and it was a brisk day, to say the least. I was at 6 a.m. when I came in. For most yards throughout the country, you're the only physician working in the emergency department at that time. As the day goes on, more physicians come in to help with the patient load, but at 6 a.m. you're by yourself for the most part. And I had seen 8 patients already that morning from 6 to 7, which, to give your listeners perspective, in a community emergency department, 6 patients your first hour as a nurse physician is a pretty good clip. But at around 7 o'clock, I was leaving a patient's room with my head down. I will never forget this. I hope I never forget this. I was leaving the patient's room head down because the patient I just saw had a pretty large hand laceration that needed to be repaired. And for hand lacerations, just like face lacerations, you really have to take your time on it, which is something I really didn't have a lot of at that morning. But all I can see is my charge nurse, who is the nurse who's in charge of keeping the flow of the department, just running up front to our triage area and just coming back with this baby, which I can see in her arms, which was blue. The baby was blue. And for your listeners, a blue baby or a blue human is somebody who's not getting enough oxygen. So the great thing about emergency medicine, which is what I love about it, is it really is a team affair. So we got to the business of trying to, really resuscitate this 2-month-old baby who was not breathing on her own or had a pulse on her own. And we tried for about 1 hour, Chris, and I just couldn't get that baby back. We just couldn't get a pulse back on that baby. And now, as an emergency physician, it's not my first pediatric death, and nor has it been since that time. I've had, unfortunately, several more since that time. It's just the nature of the work that I'm in. But that day kind of hit me hard, Chris, in that I came back to my workstation and I had seen that there were 8 more patients who had arrived to be seen during the time that we were trying to resuscitate that child. And I remember my first thought was saying to myself, "Oh my God, how am I going to see all these patients and chart on all these patients?" And then as the proverbial, thunder hits you on your head or that lightning hits you on your head, I said to myself, "My goodness, Harry, a baby just died, and you didn't have a moment even to grieve with the mother. You didn't have a moment to grieve with your nurses." Many of them were mothers themselves. I really didn't have a time to just sit with my thoughts, Chris. I was a father at that time too. And I knew, because my focus was on just kind of putting that aside, putting that deep down in, putting that in the back burner, and just kind of just going through the motions to churn through the next patient. And really what bothered me is, um, I'd driven home that evening. I finished my shift, driven home that evening, and I pulled into the garage and I said to myself, "You know what, Harry? Don't even bother telling your wife what happened today. I don't want to burden her with what had happened," which in retrospect now is a red flag. But the story continued in that I had, we put the children to bed and I came to my office here and I typed in the word physician burnout into Google. Then again, another lightning hit me in my head was, my goodness, Harry, when you're typing the word physician burnout into Google, you're already there. You're already there. And what I found was nothing reassuring at all. Really, what I was looking for is really some resources and some tactics, because I had to go back to work the next day and I didn't find any of those resources at all. I found just statistic after statistic of the sorry state that we're in. Women physicians are 3 times more likely to commit suicide compared to their other professional counterparts. You know, 80% of medical students have had at least one thought of suicide, during their medical school career. Those are the statistics I was confronted with. But I figure, I know I must not be the only person going through this, but we have to have a platform where people can obtain the resources and the tactics to get themselves from where they are, where I was at that time, to where they need to be, which is to thrive in this wonderful specialty. And that's when I had created Medicine Revive. It is just that. I've been doing that since 2018. It was a weekly blog, and then it transitioned to a podcast, and now it's a daily podcast, to help provide the resources for the physicians and for these nurses and for these firefighters who've really had a rough go, especially over these past couple of years. Provide them that resource to help them, thrive in the specialty that, we've all worked very hard to get to.
And when we were talking, these are little 5-minute daily podcasts. So
Mhm.
I'm assuming you're leaving tips, tricks, tactics. Like this is down in the field, how to get something better in 5 minutes, right?
That's exactly right. It's a 5-minute quick, and we're exactly right. You've nailed it, Chris. It's specific strategies, that helps you, you know, we've been seeing a lot of it. And Chris, we're just, trying to just to keep your head above water. And that's not what I'm interested in. I'm trying to help you become the 1% of the 1% in your specific field. And that doesn't just happen. That takes intentionality. That takes specific skills. And it's the stuff that I have used and still use every single day. It's just promoting it for people to kind of use for themselves and develop their own curriculum to see how they can become the best of the best, iconic, if you will, in their field.
Do, I mean, the most iconic thing that you have said, and this resonates with my heart tremendously. You saw a problem. You saw that there was not a solution. You didn't ask yourself, am I worthy to do it? You said, I see the problem, therefore let me go make a solution.
Yeah.
That is iconic.
Yeah.
You paved a pathway, and there isn't one entrepreneur on earth, there isn't one human on earth that if they are living their best lives, instead of waiting on someone else to make it available, that they don't have the inspiration or the desire at least to go, let me go do something about that. Now, here's the next question that it led to, because I was just like,
Hmm.
Harry, how, with nothing available, did you start finding these resources to help people?
Yeah. The greatest thing is I'm an avid reader, and I'm as my wife says, just stubbornly curious, and that I will find the answer. And it may not be perfect the first time, but I will find an answer. And I try to tell this to my children, the people that I work with, is you'll be perpetually looking for the perfect thing, but you're never going to find it. So at least just get started. And that's exactly what it did. As with a lot of things with entrepreneurship, is if you take a look at my first blog post to where I am right now, it is two different people, right? Because it's just, but it took, I guess, the will to say, I know I'm going through something right now, and I know I'm struggling with something right now. So here's what I'm doing today to help me get me to tomorrow. And if I can at least put it out there for somebody else that may say, okay, I'll use this, or hey Harry, what you talked about last week, I don't find much value in it, but I found this valuable. To me, is I always kind of I'm going to put out as much stuff as I can find, either the books that I read, the people that I follow, um, the people that I network with, other physicians. You know, in your small circle, you're going to find somebody who's doing it better than you are. That is not a competitor, that is an ally. And that's really what
Amen.
I've been really trying to focus on these past several years is, you know, I will find somebody who I resonate with, but is doing it better than me. And I'm gonna pick their brain, and I'm gonna see what works for them. And I'll take a little bit of them and a little bit of them and a little bit of them. Chris, part of being a physician is until you become a physician is you have to go through this period of what's called residency. And residency is, you finish medical school, then it depends on the specialty you're going to be in. But in emergency medicine, it's a 4-year residency. So it's similar to, I think maybe in the trades, it's called like a journeyman. It's basically like you're an intern until you're on your own. And so that 4-year residency, you're going to come across a lot of different physicians, or mentors, if you want to call them, and you're gonna find things that you like how they do things. You're gonna find things you don't like about them. So what I always tell the students that I work with now is like, hey, listen, I do things very differently than another doctor does. Take a little bit from me that you like, take a little bit from that doctor, take a little bit, and that's how you're going to develop your style. Because there still is a very much an art to medicine, and that's exactly what I try to do with Medicine Revived. Is I'm going to put you what works for me. Take a little bit of what works for you with from me here. Take a little bit of what works for you from this other person, and then develop whatever you need to help you thrive in this field. I am not offended at all if someone says, hey, this person does it better in that way. My goodness, bravo that you found that person. And if I connected you with that person, so much the better. You know,
Yeah, it's called having no ego, which I'm going to tell you, my experience of a lot of physicians, ego is right up there. And for me, listening to you right now, and I would love you to speak to this, it's made you a better human being doing this. And how has that not only affected you? I want to hear about how you've changed since you've been on this journey. And also, with humility, because I know you'll do it, how has it changed the teams that you work with? Because I'm sure that's motivational for you to continue to dig in
sure.
that trench.
Sure. Thank you. So the first part of your question, how has it changed me? I have, become more focused, right? I like all of us have many hats. I'm a physician. I'm a father. I'm a husband. I'm a grandchild. I'm a son. So, and I think many of us try to do everything perfectly per your role, and the reality is you can't.
Yeah.
I am, when I act very differently when I'm a physician than I am with my children and with my wife. Not better, not worse, just differently because that's what that arena calls for. I think the one thing that I've gotten better with, I've become much more focused and much more intentional. And I've always been decisive. That's just I think part of my thing. But I'm not afraid, I think, to take risks now. I'm not afraid to admit failure now. That was not something I was, because you're kind of hammered into never show emotion, never show that you're weak, resist the urge to take a risk because you might fail. Those are things that are kind of ingrained in the medical culture. Um, and I've changed for that 180 degrees for sure. And how does it affect my team? It affects them. They feel it. Here's a great example. When I come when I walk into the emergency department, it's the same. I come in with a huge smile and I always tell them, hello, team. We're going to have a great day today. And I could even tell you this actually came up in conversation just about 2 weeks ago. I was working a mid shift. So when a mid shift is, you're working there with another physician. And the one doc turns to me because we have our workstations next to each other. He's like, Harry, how is it that you're so positive all the time? And I looked over, I go, Mike, I have two options when I wake up in the morning. I could either dread the day or I could love the day, but the day still has to happen. So I choose to love the day. I have no idea what my day is going to be like. And that's really the crux of what emergency medicine is. I really have no idea what's going to come through my ambulance bay doors or what's coming through the front door. I have no idea. So I could be upset about that, or I could just say, I am prepared and I am ready and I'm going to figure it out. And I'm going to figure it out, but I'm going to do it with a positive attitude and, with a servant leadership attitude. And I think my team, my team appreciates that. They really seem to enjoy work with me as I do with them.
There isn't an entrepreneur that's going to listen to this when you're not doing it alone and you're building a real company. You said something, servant leadership. And what I have noticed in the companies that I've built, in the family that I'm building, co-building with my wife, in the communities of people that I'm associated with, once somebody is willing to be vulnerable enough to become a servant-based leader, it produces more servant-based leaders. It never, that energy never stops.
Yeah.
And it is such a heartwarming thing to think about. What you guys do is intense. I mean, there's no doubt about it. Death is involved. Emotions are involved. Most of those people weren't planning on coming to see you that day. That's for sure.
Right.
And you're creating compassion in something that can it makes sense. Like, hey, we need to close our emotions off because we have to go perform. I can't have a shaking hand while I'm doing this next operation because these people count on me. But at the same time, you're like, but we can't live that way.
Yeah.
We can't live that way. And if I'm going to spend 40, 60, 80 hours a week doing this thing, that's going to be my life. So how do I find the balance, which there is none, but how do I find the balance in that? And I think what you're doing is, quite honestly, you're bringing humanity back into a profession that by the nature of it says we have to become automatons. We have to be machines at what we do. That is a heck of a task, Harry.
Yeah.
That's a heck of a task.
Yeah.
But the burnout that you're talking about is imminent if you don't bring that in. How? Let's take people through one of your little 5-minute
Sure.
conversations, your podcast of, hey, you're feeling this because I haven't listened to it. I want to experience it. Bring a topic up, whatever comes to mind right now, and,
Sure.
and let the audience listen to how you're going to help them.
Sure. So one of the topics I think I just spoke about, if not, it'll be up next week or so. It's about shame culture. So shame culture is prevalent in medicine. Part of it is, again, as I said, ingrained into your maybe the ethos of medicine. So, for example, there's something in medicine called morbidity and mortality rounds. We call them M&M rounds. M&M rounds are basically what it should be. It should be something, a bad outcome had happened. Let's talk about it so this doesn't happen again. To my surgical colleagues and friends, M&M rounds is just an hour of you just getting punched in the face, essentially. You're up on stage at the lectern, and the case is on, the what happened is on the big PowerPoint presentation behind you. And then you're just getting basically just yelled at by your senior attendings, and it's not kind. It is with words that'll make you blush. And you, as maybe a surgical resident, are just berated for an hour how horrible you are. You did this wrong. Why did you do it this way? Why did you do it this way? What really was meant to be, hey, this happened. Let's make sure this doesn't happen again. Was it a process problem? Was it an equipment problem? Was it a fund of knowledge problem? How do we get past that? So one thing that I talk about on that podcast, for example, on that 5-minute show is, how do we acknowledge shame culture, and what do we do about it? Because again, I'm not so much interested about rehashing the problems. We all know what the problems are in our industry. I'm more interested in solutions. So number one, we shine a spotlight on shame culture. Number one. Number two, you model the behavior that you want. Number three, you surround yourself with the people who will model that behavior. Those are the things that, those are the just like three quick tips on shame culture. What is it? Identify the problem. What are the three solutions that are going to help you, help overcome that shame culture? So my hope in that podcast, for example, is a medical student who's listening to an M&M rounds will have that little like, excuse me, maybe maybe I would do it this way. And it just takes that one senior attending, that one senior physician or surgeon say like, you know what? You're probably right. And it happens, Chris. It happens all the time where if you're in a leadership role, if you're not so much called on it, but just ask the question like, why do we do it that way? And it's that leader who's willing to say, you know what, you're probably right. We don't have to do it this way anymore. And it sounds preposterous, but I've seen it happen dozens of times where that medical student has an idea like, hey, maybe Mr. Jones doesn't have pneumonia. Maybe he's got a clot in his lungs. And then that attendant will look at you like, holy cow, you might be right. And then we do the test, and it turns out that medical student was right. It's happened dozens of times. But the whole point of the story was, the whole point of that podcast episode was to maybe encourage someone to say like, maybe I'm going to stand up and say something today. Maybe I'm going to stand up, or maybe when I'm looking for a job, I'm going to go find myself a community with people that are more like-minded than me to support my vision of what a servant leader is. That's one of the hundreds hundreds of podcasts I've done.
Harry, how long has the AMA been around?
Oh gosh, I don't know. I really don't know the answer. It's been decades. I'm not sure if it's been hundreds of years, but it's been decades for sure.
So it has produced its own culture, for sure.
Yeah. So as you had mentioned earlier, there is a lot of not only ego in medicine, but the way medicine is practiced nowadays is become very siloed. And by that, I mean, when I started in medicine in early 2000s, you can go to a doctor's lounge and it would literally be like a town hall. You get to meet Dr. So-and-so from neuro. You get to meet Dr. So-and-so from anesthesia. You get to meet Dr. So-and-so from surgery. And that's how there was community in a doctor's lounge. I assure you with 100% certainty, if you go to a doctor's lounge today, it's going to be empty, completely empty. And because it's the way we practice nowadays, you can do most of your work at a workstation now. The time that we spend with the patient, if you or a loved one have ever seen a physician lately, you know that your time with that doctor is pretty limited, and the majority of their time is written behind a computer. So the struggle not the struggle, but the challenge that Medicine Revive has, and I have with my friends and my colleagues, is you have to be at least humble enough to say, this is not how I want to spend from here till I die, from here to retirement. What I'm doing is just keeping my head above water. And that's not what I put in decades of my life to do, to keep my head above water. I mean, I knew I wanted to become a physician since I was in freshman year of high school. I remember telling my math teacher I want to become a physician. So my goal, or my focus, which is similar to many physicians and nurses, they've wanted to do this since they were young. And the environment shouldn't dictate how you're going to live your decades in your career, because I really want people to have decades in their careers in medicine, because it's such a wonderful field, and I'm blessed every day that I have this opportunity to work with people. But yes, there has been ego in medicine, but I think we're starting to realize that how we've been practicing over the past 10, 20 years is just not working. we're not helping each other. One of my friends, Chris, who's another emergency physician, I think he said it perfectly here. He's like, there's a lot of like finger pointing sometimes in medicine, especially when things go wrong. You didn't do this or you did this, and a lot of that. And that's, I think, a lot for many industries. But my friend Chris said, he's like, you know what, here, there are so many people in this world that really want to make our jobs harder. We shouldn't do it to each other.
Woo!
And that just speaks volumes. And that's really what I hope, with Medicine Revived, is to offer people the opportunity to really help each other. And, I hope to be that guide for them.
I think you're doing it. And I think it takes so much courage to be a maverick in an industry that it has, and I do think it's over 100 years that particular industry has been there. You're fighting up an uphill battle. And you and I talked about this back in the green room. And your goal is to bring people with you that are like-minded. Hey, look, you don't become a doctor because you're not smart. So you have a lot of smart people around you. And what you're doing is you're raising your hand and you're saying, am I the only one?
Yeah.
And people are going, in fact, no, you're not the only one. Cool. And then what you're doing is going, then what are we going to do about this?
Right.
And not only are you saying, I might not do it perfectly, but I'm doing something about it, because at the end of the day, the Hippocratic Oath suggests that first I do no harm.
Right.
Well, in order to do no harm, we can't keep cutting the ham off at both ends to find out that the only reason that we're doing that is because great grandma had a short pan.
Yeah.
And you're making those changes. And I've talked to other medical people in networking, and what I've heard is exactly what you said. It's almost like you're used up and thrown out. And so the first no harm must be to yourself.
Right.
If you're going to perform at the highest level and I love the analogy. So there's always the 80-20, but inside of that 20, there's another 80-20.
Sure is.
Inside of that, there's another 80-20. And what I've seen you do is you're transcending that. And to me, this is a universal message to anyone that wants to live an elite life. It's going to take a lot of work.
Yeah.
But let it be meaningful work.
Yeah.
Let's make sure that we're holistic in our approach to it. And thank you for being that kind of person, because many of us that are not physicians, we're scared. Hey, we're giving our life to you. We need help.
Yeah.
Can you please make sure that that's actually important, that you don't just do the way that it's always been done? Because I have to, for the rest of my life, deal with the consequences of that.
Yeah.
So you're bringing humanity back to this thing.
Yeah.
And you've been doing this now for 4 years. Has this been groundbreaking work for you? And do you feel that you're living inside of a purpose that you didn't even know that you were going to do with what you're doing?
Without a question, Chris. So I always tell my wife, I go, I get up now without a clock. I get up at 4:30 without a clock. And this morning I got up at 4:24 without a clock. And I always tell my wife, Francesca, I go, listen, the time where I don't enjoy doing this is when I'll stop. But I've yet to find that day. I get up motivated with a plan of how I'm gonna to serve the people that I at least I want to say that I've been called to serve. And so that's how I practice my day. There's not all days are rainbows and sunshines, as they say, but for Medicine Revived, I've enjoyed from day one till day whatever today is. And I just can't help but love the feedback I'm getting. Here's another fun example. So I know a lot of the radiologists that I work with listen to my daily podcast and consume my stuff. Just maybe 3, 4, 5 days ago, one of the radiologists called me. He's like, "Hey, Harry, your patient room number 20 has got an acute appendicitis. And by the way, I loved your show for today." I mean, that just warms my heart so much, because, as you said, we're bringing a humanity to back into medicine. And I just love it. I just love it that, I'm able to provide something for people who I know are struggling. And that was me, at one point. And I hope it continues to grow as I envision it to grow.
Well, I know one thing. Any of you all that are listening to this, share this episode out there. I think what Harry's doing is much, much needed and much, much overdue. And brother, we're on the same mission. We just do it in a slightly different way.
Yep.
I'm really grateful that you took time out of your day to be on my podcast, and to share your heart and your knowledge with people. If people want to get in touch with you,
Mhm.
what is the best way for them to reach out to you?
The best way is on the platform itself, which is Medicine Revived or medicinerevived.com. And I'm on also all the major socials. So Facebook and Instagram are our two major ones for sure. So that's probably a good way to get started there. You can sign
And
up
I'll
for
make,
the daily rounds on those platforms too.
is it revive with an E or revived with a D?
Revived with a D.
Okay,
Medicine Revived.
good. I just want to make sure that people can find it. Harry, I think we're going to be talking again. If you'll bless our show again, and this has been absolutely amazing. Thank you again
Thank,
for being on the show.
thank you, Chris. Thanks for all you do. I appreciate it. Thanks for the opportunity.
Yes, sir. Everybody, take this show, leave a review for it, help Harry out, and go check out his show. Even if you're not a physician, I have a funny feeling I'm going to be listening to these little 5-minute tidbits because, again, I think it's universal. You're helping people. Help Harry help people, everybody. We'll see you next time.
I came from the mud. There's dirt on my hands. Strong like a tree. There's roots where I stand.
Hey friend, if you enjoyed listening to this podcast, please leave a review and subscribe to catch future casts. If you really enjoyed this episode, make sure you share it so others can benefit from it as well. I'll see you in the trenches.
Try to catch me howling at the moon.